Stick around and I'll show you how to turn kitchen scraps into garden gold.
It is a Tuesday evening. You are standing at the kitchen sink, scraping the last of the dinner plates into the trash. Onion skins, coffee grounds from this morning, the brown outer leaves of the romaine. You didn't use half an avocado that went soft before you could get to it. You tie up the bag, carry it to the bin in the hallway, and that is the end of it. Wednesday morning, the super takes it down to the street. Thursday, the truck comes. Gone. Now, walk over to the window ledge where your potted basil is sitting. It started out full and bushy when you bought it at Trader Joe's 6 weeks ago. Now it is pale, the lower leaves are yellowing, the new growth is thin and weak. So last week you went back to the store and bought a little bottle of liquid fertilizer for $8.99. You followed the instructions. You watered it in. And the basil is still struggling. The soil in that pot is tired. It is depleted. It has been feeding that plant since the nursery potted it up months ago, and there is nothing left in it to give. Now, I want you to sit with this for a moment. Those onion skins in the trash bag, those coffee grounds, the romaine leaves, the avocado. That is exactly what that basil needed. That is fertility. That is the living matter that would have broken down into the richest, darkest, most plant-available food on Earth. And you put it in a plastic bag and sent it to a landfill, and then spent $8.99 trying to replace it with something that came in a bottle.
It's amazing how much life those scraps can bring back to your plants.
There is no bad luck in this. You were never taught any differently. Almost nobody living in an American apartment today was. The knowledge of what to do with kitchen scraps, how to turn them into something instead of nothing, how to close that loop right in your own home, without a yard, without a garden, without any land at all, that knowledge belongs to an older way of living that most of us are 2 or 3 generations away from now. My grandmother grew up in a row house in Philadelphia. No yard to speak of. A small back step and a strip of dirt not wider than a welcome mat. And not one scrap of food ever left her kitchen as waste. Peels, cores, grounds, eggshells, wilted greens, stale bread. All of it had a destination. All of it went back into the soil that fed her windowsill herbs and her one small raised bed, and eventually the gardens of the neighbors she gave her finished compost away to. She did not think of this as a project or a system or a lifestyle. She thought of it as not being wasteful. It was just what you did with food that was no longer food. That knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because the infrastructure of modern city life made it easy to stop doing it. Garbage collection became reliable. Apartments got smaller. Landlords got stricter. The connection between the peel in your hand and the soil that grew the vegetable it came from got longer and longer until most of us stopped thinking about it at all. And a whole industry quietly stepped in to sell us back in bottles and bags what we had been throwing away for free. Here is what I want you to know. Composting in an apartment is not a compromise version of real composting. It is not a lesser thing you do because you do not have a backyard. Done right, it produces the same finished material, dark, crumbly, alive with microbial activity, that any outdoor pile produces. It takes up less space than a case of water. It does not smell if you understand what you are doing. And it is genuinely not hard.
Don't let myths stop you. Composting in an apartment is truly doable.
The reason most people think it is hard or smelly or impractical for apartment living is that they either tried one method that was not right for their situation, or they heard someone else's story about the one time it went wrong. Today, I am going to walk you through 3 methods that work in a real apartment. Not a house with a mudroom, not a place with outdoor access, a kitchen with limited counter space, neighbors on the other side of the wall, and a landlord who does not need any extra reasons to call you. 3 methods, each one suited to a different kind of household, a different tolerance for tending something, a different relationship with what is living in your kitchen. By the end of this video, you will know which one fits your situation. You will know exactly what to buy, what container to use, what goes in and what does not, and what to do with the finished material when you live in a city and do not have a garden bed waiting for it. The first method is the one my grandmother would have recognized if you had explained it to her, even though the equipment looks different now. The second one would have surprised her. The third one she might have called cheating, but she would have admitted it works. All three of them will keep that avocado out of the landfill and put it back where it belongs. The first method is called vermicomposting. That is a long word for a simple thing. You keep a small box of worms in your kitchen or under your sink or in a closet. You feed them your scraps, and they turn those scraps into the finest compost you will ever put your hands on. This is not a metaphor. Worm castings, the material the worms produce as they move through and digest organic matter, are so dense with microbial life and plant-available nutrients that commercial growers pay serious money for them, and you can produce them for free in a bin the size of a storage tote under your bathroom sink. Here is what you need. A plastic tote, dark-colored, not clear, somewhere between 5 and 10 gallons. You can use a Rubbermaid bin from any hardware store. Drill small holes in the lid for airflow and a few small holes near the bottom for drainage. Then, set it inside a second shallow tray to catch any liquid that drips out. That liquid, by the way, is called leachate. When diluted with water, it makes a decent liquid fertilizer for your plants. Nothing is wasted. Inside the bin, you build a bedding layer. Torn up newspaper, cardboard ripped into strips, dried leaves if you can get them, coconut coir from the garden center. Moisten it until it feels like a wrung-out sponge, damp but not dripping. This is where your worms will live. The species you want is called Eisenia fetida. Red wigglers. Not the earthworms you dig up in the yard. Those are soil dwellers and they will not thrive in a bin. Red wigglers are composting worms, surface dwellers, and they are exactly what this system needs. You can order them online and they will arrive in a small bag in the mail, which is either charming or alarming depending on your disposition. A half-pound to start, about 500 worms, is enough for a household of 1 or 2 people. Once they are in the bin and settled into the bedding, you begin feeding them.
These little guys are your new best friends for composting.
Fruit and vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, tea bags with the staple removed, crushed eggshells, paper napkins, cardboard. What you do not add is meat, dairy, oily food, or anything cooked with heavy seasoning. Not because the worms morally object, but because those materials attract pests and create odor in the confined space of a bin. Stick to raw plant matter and the system stays clean and quiet. The smell of a healthy worm bin is the smell of soil after rain. That is it. That is the whole smell. If it smells like rot, something is wrong. Usually, it means you have added too much food at once, or too much wet material without enough dry bedding to balance it. The fix is simple. Stop adding food for a week, bury some dry torn cardboard into the mix, and let the worms catch up. The balance between wet and dry, between green scraps and brown bedding, is the only thing you are managing. Once you have felt it, once you will not forget it. In 2 to 3 months you will notice that the bedding and scraps have transformed. Dark, uniform, coffee ground texture throughout the bin, almost no original material recognizable. That is finished vermicompost. You harvest it by pushing all the material to one side of the bin, adding fresh bedding and food to the empty side, and waiting a week. The worms migrate toward the food. Then you scoop out the finished material from the side they abandoned. Your plants will respond to it in ways that bottled fertilizer will not match. The second method is called bokashi, and this one operates on an entirely different principle, which is why it handles things the worm bin cannot. Bokashi is not decomposition, it is fermentation. You are not breaking organic matter down with oxygen and microbes in the traditional sense. You are pickling it with a specific group of beneficial microorganisms, usually wheat bran inoculated with lactobacillus bacteria and other fermentation cultures. They work without oxygen and produce a pre-digested material that soil breaks down extremely fast. What this means in practice is that you can put meat in it. Dairy, cooked food, fish, citrus, the things that would wreck a worm bin or an outdoor pile. Bokashi accepts nearly everything that comes out of an American kitchen, which makes it one of the most practical systems for people who cook real meals with real ingredients, and do not want to think too hard about what can and cannot go in. The setup is simple. A bokashi bucket, which is a sealed airtight container with a spigot near the bottom, and a bag of bokashi bran. You layer your scraps into the bucket, sprinkle bran over each layer the way you might layer a lasagna, and press the material down firmly to squeeze out air pockets before sealing the lid. No oxygen means the fermentation proceeds without odor escaping. The bucket sits on your counter under your sink. You open it only to add scraps and bran. You drain the liquid from the spigot every few days. That liquid, diluted about 1 to 100 with water, goes straight onto your houseplants or down the drain to help clean your pipes. The material in the bucket, after 2 weeks of fermentation, looks almost the same as when you put it in. It will be slightly pickled, slightly acidic, and it needs to finish in soil before it becomes true compost. If you have a community garden nearby or a neighbor with outdoor beds, that is where it goes. It will break down completely in the soil within 2 to 3 weeks. If you do not have outdoor access, the third method we will cover next addresses exactly that situation.
Bokashi is a game changer. Even cooked food can be composted.
2 methods, 2 different principles, both producing something valuable from what you are sending to the curb. The worm bin for steady daily scraps from a plant-forward kitchen. The bokashi bucket for everything else. The third method requires no worms, no fermentation culture, no bin with drainage holes, and no tolerance for tending anything alive in your kitchen. It is the method for the person who wants to stop sending food to the landfill but does not want a system that needs daily attention or weekly management. It works. It is slower and more hands-off than the first 2, and that is exactly the point. Here is the core idea. You freeze your scraps. That is the whole first step. You keep a container in your freezer, a gallon Ziploc bag, a repurposed yogurt tub, a small plastic bin with a lid. Every time you have a peel, a core, a handful of wilted herbs, coffee grounds, an eggshell, you put it in the freezer instead of the trash. Freezing does 2 things. It eliminates any odor completely, because nothing is decomposing. Nothing is sitting at room temperature generating the gases that make a compost bucket on the counter smell like a compost bucket on the counter. And it breaks down the cell walls of the organic material, which actually speeds up decomposition once the material does reach soil or a compost pile. Your frozen scraps will break down faster than fresh ones would. Once the container is full, you bring it somewhere that can finish the job. And in almost every American city and a growing number of suburbs, that somewhere is closer than you think. Community gardens exist in nearly every urban neighborhood in this country, and the majority of them accept compost drop-offs from local residents. Some have a bin near the entrance specifically for this. Others ask that you volunteer an hour occasionally in exchange for drop-off access. Either way, this is the original version of closing the loop in a city. The food grown in the garden feeds the neighborhood. The scraps from the neighborhood feed the garden. Your frozen bag fits right into that system. Farmers markets in most cities now include at least one composting vendor or community organization with a collection bin set up at the market on weekends. You bring your bag, you drop it off. Sometimes you get a small amount of finished compost back in exchange for what you contributed. The New York City green markets have run this program for years. Similar programs operate in Chicago, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, Boston, and dozens of smaller cities. Search your city name and compost drop-off and you will find what is available within a few miles of where you live. Municipal composting programs have expanded significantly across the country in recent years. Many cities now offer curbside organics pickup the same way they offer recycling pickup. New York, San Francisco, Seattle, and others have made it mandatory for apartment buildings above a certain size. If your building participates, you already have access to this and may not know it. Check with your building manager. If your city offers it but your building has not signed up, that is a conversation worth starting with your super or your landlord. More of them are receptive to it now than they were 5 years ago. This is where I want to stop for a moment, because this is where the real conversation begins. There is no money in teaching a family to compost their kitchen scraps. The trash bag companies do not benefit. The fertilizer companies do not benefit. The grocery stores do not benefit, because a household with rich living compost feeding its windowsill herbs and its potted tomatoes buys less of the wilted, overpriced fresh herbs in the plastic clamshell and fewer bottles of liquid plant food. The entire model of selling people back, in packaged form what they already have for free, depends on people not knowing what to do with what they have. And the apartment has been the perfect excuse. For decades, the assumption built into the way Americans talk about composting is that it requires land, a yard, a pile in the back corner behind the garage. And if you live in a studio in Chicago, or a one-bedroom in Houston, or a third-floor walk-up in Philadelphia, the conversation seems like it was never meant for you. So you keep tying the bags and carrying them down the hall, and the loop stays broken. But the loop was never supposed to be broken. Every kitchen scrap you generate came from the soil somewhere. The onion was grown in soil. The coffee was grown in soil. The avocado came from a tree rooted in soil. The fertility that produced all of it left the farm when the food was harvested, traveled through the supply chain to your kitchen, and now has 2 destinations.
Every scrap has a choice: back to the earth or into the landfill.
It goes back to the earth, or it goes into a hole in the ground wrapped in plastic where it will produce methane for the next 40 years. Those are the 2 options. Every household in this country is choosing one of them every single day, whether they think about it consciously or not. The freeze and drop method does not require you to change anything about your kitchen. It does not require counter space or a new smell or a learning curve or a trip to a specialty store. It requires a container in your freezer and the knowledge of where the nearest drop-off point is. That is the whole barrier. A container and a location, both of which you now have. Pick one of the 3 methods from today, not eventually. This week. The worm bin if you want the richest output and you are willing to tend something. The bokashi bucket if you cook everything and want to deal with nothing twice. The freezer bag and drop-off if you want to start tonight with 0 new equipment and 0 new habits except one. The scraps are going to be there either way. The only question is where they go next. Here is what we just walked through together. 3 methods for composting in an apartment, each one designed for a real kitchen in a real city with real constraints and no yard waiting outside the back door. The worm bin, quiet, productive, the best finished material you will ever put on a plant, suited to the household that generates steady plant-based scraps and wants something to tend. The bokashi bucket, sealed and odorless, accepting everything including meat and dairy and cooked food, suited to the household that cooks full meals and wants a system that asks almost nothing of them between fillings. The freeze and drop method, no equipment, no learning curve, no new smell, suited to the person who wants to stop sending food to the landfill starting tonight without buying a single thing except a Ziploc bag they probably already have in the drawer. 3 methods. One of them fits your kitchen. You know which one it is. Now I want to talk about what happens on the other side of all 3 of these systems. What you actually get when you do this consistently for 3 months, 6 months, a year. Because this is the part that nobody talks about when they explain composting to apartment dwellers, and it is the part that makes it stick. The finished material from a worm bin is called vermicast. A 1/4 cup of it mixed into the soil of a struggling houseplant will change that plant within 2 weeks in ways you can see. The new growth comes in darker and stronger. The root system fills out. Plants that have been limping along on depleted potting mix since you brought them home from the nursery suddenly behave like plants that are actually fed. This is not a dramatic claim, it is basic plant biology. Living soil produces living plants. Potting mix that has been sitting in a plastic bag on a shelf is not living soil. Vermicast is. If you have herbs on a windowsill, which most people in apartments do or have tried to, you already know the experience of buying a full bushy pot of basil in April and watching it decline by June no matter what you do. The problem is almost always the soil, not the light, not the watering, not the variety. Potting mix runs out of available nutrition fast in a small container. A monthly top dressing of finished compost, just a thin layer pressed gently into the surface of the pot, extends the productive life of that herb plant by months. You stop replacing them. You stop buying the $8.99 bottle of liquid fertilizer that gives a short-term green burst and then fades. You start actually harvesting from them the way you imagined you would when you bought them in the first place. Beyond the herbs, finished compost opens up what is possible in an apartment. Windowsill lettuce that regrows after cutting. Cherry tomatoes in a 5-gallon bucket on a south-facing balcony. Potted peppers that actually produce instead of flowering once and dropping everything. None of this requires a garden. It requires living soil. And living soil is exactly what you are making. For the people using the freeze and drop method who are not growing anything at home, the return is different but just as real. Many community gardens that accept compost drop-offs will give contributing members access to finished compost in return. You bring scraps, you take home a bag of finished material in the fall when the garden turns it over. Some city composting programs have pickup locations where residents can collect finished compost seasonally for free. San Francisco has done this for years. Seattle, Portland. More cities are moving in this direction as their programs mature. You put in food scraps and you get back something that would cost you $20 a bag at the garden center. And underneath all of that, there is something quieter happening that is harder to put a number on, but that people who do this consistently all describe in similar ways. You stop feeling like your kitchen is a one-way street. You stop looking at the onion skin and the coffee grounds and the wilted lettuce as waste, as the part of the food you pay for and then immediately discard. You start seeing them as the part of the process that closes the loop. The food comes from the soil. The scraps go back to the soil. The soil produces more food. That cycle ran without interruption for every generation of human beings before the plastic bag and the twice-weekly garbage truck made it easy to forget. So, here is what I want you to do this week, not next month, not when you get around to buying the right bin. This week. If you are starting with the worm bin, order your red wigglers today. They ship in 2 to 3 days. Find a dark plastic tote you already own or pick one up for under $10. Tear up some newspaper, moisten it, put it in the bin. The worms will arrive and you will be ready. If you are starting with bokashi, order a starter bucket and a bag of bran. While you wait for it to arrive, start collecting your scraps in a bowl in the fridge so you are not throwing anything away in the meantime. If you are starting with the freeze and drop method, open a browser right now and search your city name and compost drop-off location. Write down the closest one. Put a container in your freezer tonight. That is the whole setup. You are done. Then cut something open at the end of the week and look at what you did not throw away. The apple core, the carrot tops, the grounds from 4 mornings of coffee, the outer leaves of the cabbage. Hold that in your hands for a second before it goes in the bin or the bucket or the bag. That is not garbage. That is the oldest recycling system on Earth, and you just opted back into it. Tell me in the comments which method you are starting with and what has been stopping you from composting until now. The small, honest answers are exactly the kind of thing that helps other people in the same situation figure out that it is possible for them too. I read every single one.
Tell me, what's stopping you from starting? Let's solve it together.
Next time, since we have been talking about what happens inside the apartment, I am going to show you how to grow salad greens on a windowsill year-round with nothing but a shallow tray, a bag of good soil, and 10 minutes every 2 weeks. It is the natural next step after today you made the compost. Now let it feed something.